11 years in, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is easily the single most intricate and expansive theatrical franchise of all time, spanning 23 movies and 11 individual sub-franchises in total by the end of 2019. I personally believe that to get the complete MCU experience in all its glory, one must watch the movies in a chronological order and not in the often tangled and confusing release order. By streamlining the MCU chronologically, we can watch as intricately woven storylines, character arcs, and series of events play out from beginning to end, avoiding timeline confusion in the process. In this video, I will run through my own personal chronological viewing order for the franchise, so you can prepare yourself for the cinematic event of our lifetime, Avengers Endgame. I'll preface this video by saying that there is multiple ways to watch the MCU, as the events of some movies overlap or span multiple years, while the events of others don't exactly have clear timeline placement. My order is based specifically on how I believe the saga flows and paces best narratively, and I'll explain my placements along the way. I won't be going in depth into each movie's plot, but be warned of spoilers along the way. I also won't be touching on any of the TV series, because barely any of them impact the cinematic viewing experience in the slightest. And at that, let's get into it. This is how to watch the Marvel Cinematic Universe in chronological order. We kick off our MCU experience with Captain America: The First Avenger. Watching The First Avenger first introduces us to Steve Rogers, the founding member of the Avengers. We see Rogers' transformation into super soldier Captain America and witness the moments the public became intrigued by superhuman beings. First Avenger takes place in the 1940s during World War II for the vast majority of its runtime, making it an obvious place to start. However, its inclusion of the Tesseract introduces us to the very first of the Infinity Stones, the elements which tie the entire Infinity Saga together from the very beginning. The Tesseract is of course a cube-shaped vessel for the Space Stone. We are also introduced to Cap's best friend Bucky Barnes, his love interest Peggy Carter, and we get a glimpse into the early days of S.H.I.E.L.D. All in all, it's just the perfect way to dive right into the MCU, with plenty of groundwork laid out for the saga from the word go, including the opening of multiple arcs and character narratives that drive the entire franchise forward and affect the series at large. By the film's final scene, we travel into the main timeline of events in the mid-2010s and find ourselves introduced to Nick Fury for the very first time, segueing us into the Infinity Saga. Technically, this event takes place just before the Avengers, but I think it works fine here and is a good tease of the character who we'll learn more about in Captain Marvel, where we double back to the 1990s to experience the journey of Carol Danvers as she becomes the most powerful hero in the entire MCU. Captain Marvel does its work at introducing what will likely be the next major arc in the MCU, the Kree-Skrull Saga, but will also tie into the Infinity Saga enormously, as she will later appear in its final chapter. As alluded to, we are also introduced to a younger Nick Fury as he discovers an interest in gifted superhuman beings, explaining his motivation in the saga at large. Next up, we come back into the main timeline for Iron Man, where we're introduced to genius billionaire playboy philanthropist Tony Stark, who takes on the role of Iron Man as he escapes the clutches of terrorists armed with his own military weapons meant for the US Army. In a bid to protect the world from an evil he, in part, created, Stark publicly outs himself as Iron Man and brings superhuman beings to the world's forefront once again. This also grabs the attention of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Nick Fury, who makes mention of the Avengers initiative for the very first time. Iron Man 2 follows only a couple months after the events of the first, and I've always felt it works as a direct follow-up. The movie introduces us to S.H.I.E.L.D. agent Natasha Romanoff, aka the Black Widow, and establishes James Rhodes, a character from the first film, as the War Machine. Nick Fury plays quite a large role in this one too, giving us our first proper look at the Avengers initiative, the idea to form a group of remarkable individuals to help fight the world's greatest battles. In the film's final moments, Stark is assigned as a consultant of the Avengers who will aid in Fury's recruitment of the members. The film's post-credit scene also gives us a nice little teaser of what's to come. Running simultaneously to Iron Man 2 is The Incredible Hulk. The movie establishes Bruce Banner into the MCU, a scientist who takes part in an attempted experiment to replicate the super soldier program with added gamma radiation. Backfiring, the experiment turns Banner into a green rage monster called the Hulk. The movie also introduces us to General Thaddeus Ross, who will play a larger role in the franchise later on. Some may argue that this movie should be watched immediately following the first Iron Man, since scenes from Incredible Hulk are alluded to in Iron Man 2. However, the post-credits appearance of Stark in Incredible Hulk, which sees him attempting to recruit Banner to the Avengers initiative, makes more sense when we already know that Stark is working as Fury's consultant. Next up is Thor, where we are now introduced to the godlike being from another cosmic realm who is banished to Earth and winds up on the radar of Nick Fury and S.H.I.E.L.D. This one introduces us to a number of important characters going forward in the saga, including Thor's mischievous and sometimes evil brother Loki, who will become a main antagonist in coming films, as well as Hawkeye, aka the Avengers bow and arrow guy. We also get our first introduction to the cosmic side of the MCU and the 9 realms which exist within the universe. Thor's post-credits scene reintroduces us to the Tesseract, originally a nice way to tie into First Avenger where we then learn about the Tesseract, but in this order, simply a great segue into the biggest cinematic event of all time, at the time, the Avengers. The Avengers pulls all our heroes together for the very first time on screen to protect New York, aka the world, from the hands of aliens. Most importantly, it's the film that introduces us to the mad titan Thanos himself as he begins his conquest to bring together all the Infinity Stones and demolish anyone who stands in his way. The entire events of the movie are orchestrated by Thanos as he sends Loki and an army of Chitauri aliens to gather the Tesseract. Thanos also arms Loki with our second Infinity Stone, the Mind Stone, in the form of a scepter. Next up is the MCU's first major character study, Iron Man 3. The movie explores the effects of the invasion of New York on the most human of the Avengers, Tony Stark, who we follow as he struggles with his newfound alter ego while battling international foes and his own inner demons in the form of PTSD. While not a fan favourite film, Iron Man 3 lays a lot of the MCU's emotional groundwork, introducing the larger stakes of the saga on a more intimate level. We also get to see Pepper Potts suit up for the first time, foreshadowing events towards the saga's conclusion. Next up, Thor the Dark World is another hard slog to get through, but it also deals with the aftermath of the Avengers, where Loki is given a life prison sentence by the All-Father Odin for his crimes against humanity. He does of course break out to assist Thor in saving the universe against dark elves who plan to use a liquefied dark energy to bring destruction to all the realms. This energy, known as the Ether, is the introduction to our third Infinity Stone, the Reality Stone. At the end of the film, the Ether is entrusted to a strange being known as the Collector. Loki's escape also leads to a mischief which will play a role later in the timeline. Next is Captain America the Winter Soldier. This is one of the best entries in the entire MCU and an incredible narrative shift for the franchise, moving it into more dramatic territory. The film explores Captain America's post-Avengers exploits. He's now an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. working alongside Black Widow. There's a lot of great character development for the two here, all the while introducing us to another franchise mainstay, Sam Wilson aka the Falcon. The film also explores another series of events which will become the catalyst for the next handful of films: the dismantling of S.H.I.E.L.D., the ultimate disappearance of Nick Fury, and the reintroduction of Bucky Barnes, also alive in the 21st century. We are also very briefly teased with the introduction of Wanda and Pietro Maximoff, the former of the two who will become an important character going forward. Next is Guardians of the Galaxy. What at the time seemed like the most disconnected film of the MCU turned out to be one of the most seminal entries in the entire saga. Guardians promptly opens up the cosmic side of the MCU and introduces us to a new ragtag team of intergalactic outcasts and outlaws. The Guardians are thrown together to keep a mysterious orb containing our fourth Infinity Stone, the Power Stone, out of the hands of a radical Kree militant, Ronan, who we've already met in Captain Marvel. Ronan is the latest disciple of Thanos, who's been sent to collect Infinity Stones from around the galaxy. Guardians is an incredibly important chapter of the MCU, as it gives us our first proper introduction to the Infinity Stones and their incredible powers, during a brilliant sequence with the Collector, and also properly introduces us to Thanos and his desire for the stones, setting the events of Infinity War into motion. Watching Guardians as the 11th film in the saga places it right at the heart of the Infinity Arc, a perfect place for everything to start kicking off. Next is the Guardians sequel, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Guardians 2 is perhaps the most confusing film of the bunch, timeline-wise. Despite being released 3 years after the first, with 4 movies in between, it's set chronologically only months after the events of it. Guardians 2 establishes the bond between the group of outcasts as well as the cosmic heritage of Peter Quill, aka Star-Lord. The movie somewhat stands on its own and doesn't really affect the greater MCU as much as the first, but the sibling rivalry between the daughters of Thanos, Gamora, and Nebula is elaborated, also setting a course for Infinity War's events. The next film, Avengers Age of Ultron, brings us back down to Earth and serves as a center point for coming events in the MCU saga. The Avengers are thrown back together to fight off a bunch of Hydra agents and retrieve the scepter used by Loki in the first Avengers from their secret base. But when Stark accidentally creates an evil life form hell-bent on destroying humanity while experimenting with AI life, the team are once again forced to rid the world of his lethal creation. The film's climax sees an enormous battle over the country of Sokovia, resulting in terrible destruction and a mass loss of life, fracturing not only the public perception of the Avengers, but also fracturing the team themselves. After a series of visions brought on by the newly introduced Scarlet Witch show Thor an impending doom on Asgard and the greater universe, he becomes inquisitive over the Infinity Stones, visiting a Norn cave where another series of visions inform him of Thanos' plan to collect the stones. He returns to Asgard to do more research, while Bruce Banner, now stuck in his Hulk state after losing control of the Beast, steals an Avengers Quinjet and flies off into the unknown. The film not only introduces us to Scarlet Witch, who joins the team as a permanent member, but also sees the creation of Vision using the Mind Stone and Stark's Jarvis AI interface. The two join a newly modified roster of the Avengers. Nick Fury also makes a brief appearance to remind us that he's not dead, and the film's post-credit scene shows us that Thanos is now peeved at the paltry efforts of Loki and Ronan and vows to do his own bidding and collect the stones himself. Next, we shrink right into Ant-Man, an action comedy set soon after the events of Age of Ultron. Placing Ant-Man here gives us a breather from the heavy MCU narrative and provides some comic relief before we get right into the nitty-gritty. The movie doesn't require too much intense thinking as it's fairly self-contained, other than a brief sequence where Ant-Man battles the Falcon on the new Avengers compound. The movie introduces us to Scott Lang, who becomes the new incarnation of the Ant-Man under the tutelage of Hank Pym, the former Ant-Man and S.H.I.E.L.D. spy during the Cold War. The movie does, however, briefly introduce us to the alternate dimension of the quantum realm, where time and space cease to exist. The realm is accessible by quantum shrinking with the aid of Pym particles. All of this will have a drastic role to play in the conclusion of the saga. Up next is Captain America Civil War. Civil War follows not long after and sees the Avengers split into two factions after a series of high casualty events lead the UN to place sanctions on the team. The Avengers are implored to sign a series of accords, taking accountability for their actions and agreeing to government regulation. One half of the team, Team Iron Man, agrees to sign the accords, the other half, Team Cap, disagrees. As tensions run high, the team ends up fighting each other on an airport runway. The movie not only brings Ant-Man into the roster of Avengers, but also introduces us to two new recruits. Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man, who is taken under the wing of Stark as a protege, and T'Challa, aka the Black Panther of Wakanda, who appears to seek revenge on Bucky Barnes, who has been framed for his father's death. And the movie culminates with a battle between Stark and Rogers, where, caught in the crossfire, Bucky loses his arm and is taken to Wakanda by Rogers for treatment after his name is cleared. This brings us right into Black Panther, a movie which takes place almost immediately after Civil War and follows T'Challa back to Wakanda to take his throne as king after his father's death. Again, this is a very self-contained story and works mostly as a character piece for the Black Panther. What this movie does offer us, however, is a look into the world of Wakanda, which will become an enormous battleground for the incoming Infinity Wars and introduce us to its advanced vibranium-based tech. We also catch back up with Bucky Barnes, who seems to be healing well under the care of Shuri and the Wakandans. Next up is Spider-Man Homecoming, which takes place around the same time frame as Black Panther, focusing on how the events of Civil War have impacted on the average teenage life of Peter Parker. The movie explores the further ramifications of the Avengers Battle of New York as Spider-Man comes head-to-head with a rising criminal underworld boss, the Vulture, who is trading scavenged Chitauri tech on the black market. Also explored is the tumultuous mentor-student relationship between Stark and Parker. After heroically saving the day, Stark offers Parker a spot on the Avengers team along with a shiny new Iron Spider suit, which he turns down. Happy Hogan and Pepper Potts make their first appearance since earlier in the saga, briefly teasing upcoming character development. The events of Doctor Strange take place over a number of years. Its placement is up for much debate amongst fans, but to me it makes sense to slot it in here. Again, Strange is a seemingly self-contained story, but exists as an introduction to the mystical and magical elements of the MCU, as Dr. Stephen Strange begins training in the mystical arts to become the Sorcerer Supreme, keeping watch over the Earth's sanctums. As a result, at the perfect moment in our narrative, the movie opens up our understanding of the multiverse, a series of parallel dimensions and universes coexisting at the same time within the MCU, which includes the quantum realm previously seen in Ant-Man. The movie also finds us the fifth Infinity Stone, the Time Stone, kept within Strange's sorcerer amulet, the Eye of Agamotto. The movie sees Strange use the stone to alter the passage of time in an effort to save Earth from devastation brought upon by forces from the Dark Dimension. Much as the previous three films, Thor Ragnarok runs pretty much concurrently. The movie opens to find Thor traversing the galaxy in search of the Infinity Stones before travelling back to Asgard, where he finds Loki has taken over the realm under the guise of Odin. Thor convinces Loki to give up the charade, and they travel to New York to find the real Odin. Here the two run in with Doctor Strange, who wishes Loki to be returned to Asgard, but on their way back they are confronted by the evil Hela, who too wants the throne of Asgard. Hela smashes Thor's hammer, and intercepting Loki's attempts to escape sends Thor and Loki off to the planet SAGA. Thor finds himself imprisoned and forced to fight against the Hulk, who has been stuck in Hulk form since he crash-landed his Quinjet on SAGA and has been living as a gladiator slave. Thor, Loki, newfound ally Valkyrie, and Hulk, who has now returned to his human form, escape SAGA and return to a battle on Asgard against Hela and demon Surtur, which ends in the total annihilation of Asgard itself, but not before Loki can sneakily steal the Tesseract from Odin's vault. The population of Asgard rockets into deep space, charting a course for Earth, with Thor now sitting on the throne of King. The movie ends with the Asgardian ship Statesman being approached by Thanos' ship Sanctuary 2. This is a direct tie into the beginning of Infinity War, but we'll let this sit as a teaser while we venture back to Earth for another quick breather with Ant-Man and the Wasp, which is set roughly during the events of Ragnarok and into the events of Infinity War. It's been 2 years since Civil War, and Scott Lang is on his final days of house arrest after taking a deal with the government to free him from prison. Again, we get a fairly self-contained film here, but it sees Hope Van Dyne taking on the mantle of the Wasp and gives us a greater understanding of the quantum realm and quantum travel, which will be handy to know as we approach the final chapters of the Infinity Saga. Of course, the movie ends with a major tie into Infinity War. Viewing this after Infinity War, as per release order, brings an understanding of what's transpired to the characters, but viewed before the film itself, I believe it gives another one of those teaser feelings, making you wonder what on earth just happened. I mean, we do already know what happens, but narratively speaking, it just works really well. Finally, we double back in time slightly to the beginning of the end, the battle between Thanos and the Avengers for the Infinity Stones in Avengers Infinity War. The film pulls together all the plot threads, story arcs, and just about every single character from the previous 20 movies to fight off the Mad Titan right across the galaxy on multiple planets and astral planes. The movie introduces the final of the 6 Infinity Stones, the Soul Stone, as Thanos successfully brings them all together in a plight to rid the universe of half its life forms. This culminates in mass bloodshed as he achieves his ultimate goal and sends a vast number of our heroes into the unknown, leaving only the founding Avengers and a few side characters to pick up the pieces. Remember how we watched Captain Marvel all that time ago? Well, at the end of Infinity War, we get our first nod to the character in 20 films. This is a great tie back to where we begun our journey, further establishing the interconnectivity of overarching narratives. Of course, Captain Marvel will be released between Infinity War and Endgame, but how great does it work narratively watching it at the beginning of our marathon once we get to this point? In 2019, Avengers Endgame will be released and bring a culmination to the MCU's 11-year-long Infinity Saga, finally bringing conclusions to our character narratives and story arcs. The film will find the remaining Avengers re-teaming to take on Thanos one final time with the help of new recruits Captain Marvel and the Wasp. It's rumoured that the film will incorporate elements of quantum travel, multiversal travel, and even time travel, pulling together the final threads of the cosmic story arc. Of course, while Endgame concludes the MCU's Infinity arc, it doesn't conclude the MCU as a whole. Following soon after Endgame is Spider-Man Far From Home, which has been confirmed to be taking place within minutes of Endgame's conclusion. The movie will likely break free from the Infinity Saga, paving the way towards the MCU's next grand story arc. But as the movie follows Peter Parker's global adventures following the events of Endgame, with Nick Fury, Maria Hill, and Happy Hogan by his side, it should offer an Iron Man 3 type narrative link, working as an epilogue to the Infinity Saga by exploring the ramifications of it on future MCU storytelling. And at that, we come to the end of my personal chronological viewing order for the MCU. Are you going to tackle this marathon event, or do you have your own particular order to view the films? Fire away in the comments below with your thoughts, but as always guys, stay civil. There's no right or wrong way to watch these incredible films. If this is your first time viewing one of my videos, you like what you've seen, you'd like to see more like this in the future, then please don't forget to hit that big old subscribe button up on your screen right now, and also hit that like button down below if you're feeling extra generous. Also, don't forget to check out my many social media accounts, and please consider supporting me over on Patreon. Thanks for watching guys, and I hope you have a wonderful day.